Hello everyone and welcome to 27. Today I'm going to do a little feature on two of the most unloved 911s that we've ever had. Now first of all there's the SC. That was actually quite well received at the time, and it was really one of the 911s that started that reputation that a 911 has as a usable everyday car. It was quite a step up from the ones that came before in terms of usability. However, over the years it developed a reputation as one of the lesser 911s. I don't actually know why that is, because from everything I've heard, they're actually really good to drive, but that's the reputation that it got. The poor old 964 C4 was burdened with a double whammy. First of all, it was the 964, which was received not too badly, and again, it made the car even more usable by being a C4. These are absolutely fantastic in the rain and the snow. There's nothing like them for a sports car. But the 964 developed a bit of a reputation for having leaky, unreliable engines, which I think wasn't completely deserved. And certainly by now, they've all either been sorted out or they weren't problematic in the first place. But secondly, poor old Wolfie here was burdened with being a C4 as well. And people have waxed lyrical for years and years that being a C4, it takes the handling purity out of the 911, that it just doesn't go as well as it should, that the steering feel isn't quite as light, quite as delicate, quite as tactile as the C2s. I mean, you'll never hear the end of the arguments between people who say that it makes zero difference, at least on the road, and people who say it does. Some have gone even so far as to convert these lovely cars from C4 to C2, going at great length to go through all that rigmarole, which is just, you know, it's a bit heresy really. But the truth is that a well set up C4 with good suspension, good geometry, is a great car on the road. And this one, belonging to Gina Purcell, well, both cars actually belong to Gina, so thank you very much for letting me take these out today, Gina. These are both really well set up. They're pretty standard cars. I mean, the SC is quite standard, but in terms of geometry and suspension, they've been tweaked. And I'm sure this will make all the difference with this C4. I remember from mine as well, from personal experience, that once I'd done those, it changed dramatically. And I recently drove a standard C4, and I could kind of understand where that original criticism was coming from, because it was a bit heavy-footed, a bit slow to steer, didn't quite have that 911 DNA that we all crave. I'm fairly sure, I'll drive it later, but I'm fairly sure that this is going to change when I drive Wolfie. So let's take them out for a spin. We are in the SC, baptised Steffi by Gina. This has the older gearbox. It doesn't have the G50 that came after on some of the 3.2s. I've forgotten what this gearbox is called now, but it's the earlier one that these had. And actually I really quite like it, but a lot of people don't. They don't have a great reputation. They have a very long throw. And they're not the easiest to use, but I think they're actually really nice once you get the hang of it. Interior wise, it's just classic 911 with a bit of an older sort of twist on it. The older cars obviously have a full console there, the 964s, but pretty much it's a familiar place. I really like these old dials. I think they look really cool. These SCs have the 3-litre engine, which was borrowed from the turbos, so it's a really good engine. It's more reliable than the 2.7s that came before. It's really torquey, but it really likes to rev. In many ways, it's actually a nicer engine, or more fun to drive, than the than the 3.2s that came after, that weren't quite as revvy. You can't rush that gearbox, that much is true. There's a real solidity about these cars. They just feel like tanks. It's unbelievable. You can feel in the chassis that it's an older car, but I don't mean that as a negative. It rides really well, and if the wheels are being kept in contact with the ground at all times, so suspension's doing its job. But it feels a little bit less agile compared to the earlier cars, I would say. The steering isn't quick, and it's quite heavy, and it really sort of loads up in corners. It really makes you feel like you're in a car from another time. But it all adds to it though. So it's funny, everything takes a measured response. Everything is slow. The gear change is quite slow. The throttle pedal is quite long and quite heavy. The brakes require a good shove. So everything that you're doing in the SC just requires thought. You can't just jump into it and just treat it like a PlayStation game. You have to think about what you're doing. It's so rewarding to drive though. That 3-litre engine, it's really spinny as well. It's turbine smooth, and it really likes to rev upwards. Now get in the 964 and see how that fares. It's so familiar, that 964 lump, that grumbly old 3.6. And the 964 feels solid really in the same way as the SC does. But I'm quite surprised by how it feels like a more modern car. I don't know, the seats feel a little bit more, I don't know if they're the same sort of seats, they feel different. I don't know, maybe it's just the driving position. The dash, although it's the same architecture, it just gives it a little bit more of a modern feel, and it definitely drives like a more modern car. All the controls are, I don't know, they're just easier to use. The gear change again is quite heavy. It's not a light gear change, but it's got this little stumpy lever, but it's much easier and more intuitive to use. Steering is a lot lighter, and it's a more precise drive as well. The 3.6 doesn't feel quite as responsive as the 3-litre SC lump though. It's got a torque and everything, and it doesn't feel quite as eager. Still has a bit of weight to it, and it tucks really nicely into corners. Definitely a much easier car to drive quickly. It's friendly. The brakes feel a little bit lacking. I'll have to talk to Gina. They don't feel that strong. I don't think they are that strong in 911s, but particularly in this, they're quite, it takes a while to get her stopped. The gear change is lovely. There is a little bit of notchiness going into second, but it's got a really sort of like a rifle bolt feel to it. It's really precise. You can heel and toe with the best of them, and it's chuckable. And you know that it's not going to like spin over backwards and chuck you into a hedge because it's a C4. Now I think you all know I converted my C4, and this does really remind me of driving it before I did anything to it though, to be honest. It steers really well, this car. So look, driven in isolation, I really don't think you'd notice the difference with a C2, or you'd miss a C2. But I do have to say that having mucked around a lot with C2s, having made my car into a C2, there is a difference between this and a C2. The steering is just it's slightly dulled, I think, and it just feels it's a little bit less responsive. It's not a big deal, and I think if you're using it day to day, I mean, this is a lot of fun, and it's really good round the bends as well. A C2 is just a little bit, that 5-10% sharper or whatever. To some people that's really important. To you, maybe it isn't. I really depends how you're going to use the car. You know, if it's something you're going to track, go for a C2. If you're just looking for an all-weather, all-round car, get it nicely set up like this, and then it's just a joy to use. Now, if you're going to ask me what would you pick between this and the SC, that's a really hard one. I'm not actually sure what I would go for. The SC is really the classic car, the full classic car experience. This does have a more modern feel to it. That's not necessarily a bad thing. This is undoubtedly an easier car to drive, which is what Porsche were aiming for anyway back in the day. They wanted to make 911s more, you know, more everyday usable. So I don't know. I really don't know. I think I'd have to drive Steffi, the FC, a little bit more to finally make up my mind. They are both good cars though, and I'm glad that the fact that they were the unloved 911s has really changed now. I mean, SCs are pretty much they're almost held on pars with 3.2s now, I think. They're probably more fun to drive, in fact. 964s sort of, you know, went up a long time ago, and nowadays, you know, whether it's a C4 or C2, they're held in high regard. Thank you all very much for watching. Please subscribe if you haven't, and I look forward to seeing you for the next one.